When we talk about chronic illness, the conversation usually sticks to the clinical side: blood markers, medication schedules, or physical symptoms. But there's a specific, much quieter transformation that happens after a diagnosis like adrenal insufficiency. It's the moment you realize that the person you were before the diagnosis isn't coming back in the same way. We're looking at a piece from My Adrenal Life that tackles this head-on, focusing on identity loss and the grief of who you were while trying to figure out who you're becoming.
It is such a heavy topic because it's so invisible. Adrenal insufficiency, whether it's primary like Addison's disease, secondary, tertiary, or even steroid-induced, completely rewires your relationship with your own body. You go from a state where your body just works to a state where every ounce of energy, every stressful moment, and every plan for the future has to be calculated. The article points out that cortisol is essential for everything from blood pressure stability to immune response. When that system breaks, the fundamental assumptions you had about your life break with it.
That's a profound shift. You mentioned assumptions, and the article lists a few that really hit home. The idea that my body will show up for me, or that I can push through if I need to. For someone without this condition, those aren't even thoughts. They're just facts of life. But for someone with adrenal insufficiency, pushing through isn't just a matter of willpower. It can be a medical emergency.
Exactly. And that's where the identity disruption begins. Psychological research, like the studies cited from the National Institutes of Health, recognizes this as chronic illness-related identity loss. It's not just that you're sick, it's that the you who was reliable, spontaneous, or high energy has been replaced by someone who has to carry a medical alert bracelet and monitor their salt intake and stress levels 24/7. That transition is a form of bereavement.
It's interesting you use the word bereavement. We usually reserve that for the death of a person, but the article cites SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, which explicitly includes the loss of health and function as a valid source of grief. Is it fair to say people are essentially mourning themselves?
It's exactly what they're doing. They are mourning the version of themselves that didn't have to think this hard. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, loss is defined broadly as the absence of something deeply meaningful, which includes roles and control. When you lose the ability to be the parent who runs around at the park or the employee who stays late without a second thought, you're losing a piece of your identity. And as the article notes, that grief doesn't just look like sadness. It looks like irritability, numbness, or even a profound sense of guilt.
The guilt is a big one. I think a lot of people feel like they're failing their families or their partners because they can't do what they used to, but we have to talk about the before and after divide. The article describes it as a clear line in the sand. Before, life was automatic. After, it's manual. Everything requires pacing and monitoring. Does that mental load ever get lighter, or is that just the new permanent reality?
It's a bit of both. The mental load is permanent, but the way you carry it changes. This is where the concept of long-term adaptation comes in. It's not about going back to the before version of you. It's about building something new. Research into illness identity suggests that people eventually move toward integration. That's where the illness is a part of who you are, but it's not the entirety of who you are. You start to redefine what strength looks like. Maybe strength isn't running a marathon anymore. Maybe strength is the discipline it takes to manage a complex endocrine disorder every single day.
But that adaptation isn't a straight line, right? The article is very clear that the grief cycle isn't linear. The American Psychological Association notes that the stages of grief, denial, anger, bargaining, they overlap and repeat. You might feel like you've accepted your diagnosis one month, and then a crisis hits, or you miss a big event, and you're right back in that deep frustration.
That's a crucial point. People often feel like they failed if they feel sad about their illness 2 years after diagnosis. But as SAMHSA describes, grief comes in waves. It's cyclical. You might be stable, but then a major life event happens, a wedding, a job change, even just a bad flu, and it reminds you all over again of what you've lost. That doesn't mean you're back at square one. It just means your life is continuing to interact with that loss.
I want to shift gears slightly because this isn't just happening to the patient. If you're a caregiver or a family member, you're living in this afterworld too. You're also grieving the before version of your loved one and the life you envisioned together. The article doesn't explicitly focus on them, but the parallels are undeniable. The family has to adapt to the pacing, the monitoring, and the constant threat of an adrenal crisis.
Caregivers go through a secondary version of this identity loss. They might have seen themselves as a partner in an equal physical adventure, and now they are also a medical advocate, a monitor, and sometimes the one who has to administer an emergency injection. Their roles have shifted just as much. They are grieving the spontaneity they used to share with their loved one. The mental load we talked about, the caregiver carries a massive portion of that too, often while trying to suppress their own grief so they don't burden the patient.
That creates a complicated dynamic. You have two people in a household, both grieving the same lost before life, but often doing it in silence. The article suggests that naming the loss is one of the first steps toward moving through it. Saying out loud, I miss who I was, or I miss how our life used to be. It seems simple, but it sounds incredibly difficult to actually do.
It is difficult because it feels like complaining or like you're not being positive enough. But naming it makes the pain visible. And as the My Adrenal Life piece says, visible pain is easier to process than unspoken pain. For caregivers and patients alike, acknowledging that this situation is objectively hard and that it's okay to be angry about it is vital for emotional resilience. The National Institute of Mental Health even points out that chronic illness is linked to a higher risk of depression, so addressing these feelings early is actually a part of medical management.
There's also this idea of separating your worth from your capacity. If your identity was tied to being the productive one or the athletic one, and you can't be that anymore, it's easy to feel less than. The article argues that while your body's capacity has changed, your value hasn't. How do you actually internalize that when the world measures value by what you can do?
It requires a radical shift in perspective. You have to find small moments of agency. Maybe you can't work a 40-hour week, but you can be the person who offers deep, focused presence to a friend, or you become an expert in your own physiology. That is a form of agency. The article suggests that moving through this is about finding parts of yourself that are still steady, still present, still yours. It's about looking for the you that exists outside of your cortisol levels.
I think the most validating part of this whole discussion is the idea that different does not mean broken. Adrenal insufficiency is a massive, complex, and ongoing challenge. Adapting to it isn't a small feat. It's actually a sign of incredible strength, even if that strength looks like resting on the couch because your body needs it.
And that's the takeaway. If you're living with this, or if you're loving someone who is, the identity loss you're feeling isn't in your head. It's a documented psychological response to a major life trauma. The labs might show your levels are fine on medication, but they don't show the emotional labor of getting there. Understanding that this grief is a cycle, not a one-time event, can hopefully give people the permission to be gentle with themselves when those heavy days hit.
It really comes down to community and support. SAMHSA emphasizes that peer groups and professional support are key. You shouldn't have to navigate the after version of your life alone, especially when the person you used to be feels so far away. Whether you're the one with the diagnosis or the one holding the emergency kit, acknowledging the loss is the only way to start building the new version of the life you're living now.
Exactly. You aren't less than who you were. You're just navigating a much more complex reality now. And that adaptation, while invisible to most, is a profound achievement in itself.
This conversation highlights just how much of the chronic illness journey happens beneath the surface, far beyond the doctor's office. If you found this perspective on identity and grief helpful, please share this episode with someone who might need to hear that they aren't alone in this transition.